All right, hello everyone. My name is Catherine Nichols, and this is my final presentation for College Composition, English 12370. Today's topic is going to be American society during the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it is safe to say that there has been chaos these past couple months of 2020, with COVID-19 and shutting the states down, and the chaos towards the end of the summer with the death of George Floyd and the riots across our nation. I think it's something that definitely needs to be talked about. So let's dive in. So, my thesis. Although many members of the Black Lives Matter community believe that their behavior is rationalized to get media's attention for change, there can be serious repercussions for their actions. Due to their erratic behavior, Americans can see the Black Lives Matter movement as violent, an excuse for rioting and looting, and a chance to get arrested and hurt. I chose this topic because as a young, I want to use the word uneducated, I'm slowly getting educated on each party's beliefs, and I'm just standing, as an individual with what I'm watching across our country. And I think this is something that if I'm feeling, there has to be other people feeling the same way as I do. So I will say that at the beginning of the riots after the death of George Floyd, I think everyone can agree that the Black Lives Matter community really just stood up and spoke out more than ever before. And I feel like there was very good intent behind their peaceful protests, but there is a line between peaceful protests and violence. And as a bystander, just watch a young person in our country watching everything unfold, I noticed some things that just didn't seem right, and it just didn't seem like it was falling under the true intent of Black Lives Matter community. All right, so how I viewed the Black Lives Matter organization at the start of the chaos in our nation. It could be viewed as violent, an excuse for rioting and looting, and a chance to be arrested or injured. I sat there watching CNN and all the other news coverage, media, you name it, and I watched a community burn down a police unit and, burn down a Target. And it didn't seem like that's the true intent of the Black Lives Matter organization. So a riot can be defined as a tumultuous disturbance of the public peace by three or more persons assembled together and acting with a common intent. So we all know that the Black Lives Matter community has always been here, even before the start of the summer and the chaos of 2020. It's always been here. There's been great organizations and movements throughout our history with them. But there was a sudden rise of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer. And I think it really sparked after the death of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, as well as Breonna Taylor. Three young Black Americans killed by white Americans, and I think it just really set our country off course. So how Americans can view the Black Lives Matter movement as violent. There was property damage during these protests. $1 billion to $2 billion of insured property damage. It shows that Americans are angry enough that they're causing destruction of our nation, and it just shows that one group of people can cause that much damage. And I think just sitting back and watching this all just happen in front of us, and there's not really much we can do about it, and we have to let police or law enforcement and the National Guard run its course. But as a other citizen in America, we have to just let it unfold. And it gives the impression of any viewer of the Black Lives Matter movement that they can be notorious to property damage, and they're enraged enough to promote all this damage to their own cities and hometowns. I give the example that family mom and pop shops have been destroyed, and many rely on that income, and it's their livelihood that has been destroyed from one group of people and their organization's intent. I understand. I think a lot of people understand the anger and the frustration and the idea behind the peaceful protests, but when they turn violent and they damage and potentially destroy one of their own life work, it doesn't make sense. And for violent protests in one day, in total, there was over 7,750 Black Lives Matter protests in our country over the past 6 months, and about 550 of them were violent, and this calculates to about 6 violent protests a day. And this just brings up the question, would you be happy to live in a country with 6 violent protests a day? 6 violent protests, it still means there's injuries, there's arrests, and there's property damage. And this can just lead viewers to associate the violent protests with all of the Black Lives Matter organization, since it took a turn so quickly. And there's already so much danger and stress in our country as it is, so why add more 6 scary things on top of it? So this chart is from May 24th to August 22nd of 2020. This is the map of the United States, and as you can see, the dark blue dots are protests across the country, and where it is orange is riots. You can see the size of the circle is the number of events, and you can see off to the west, and across the country, it really just depends on where it is, the size of the dot as well. That's how many events there were. So as we can see over in Oregon, there was a total of about 40 violent riots, as well as mini riots all across our country. All right, so how is it an excuse for rioting and looting? There's many reasons as to why Black Americans are frustrated and annoyed and angry, but Floyd's death was, you can call it a cherry on top. Again, the Black Lives Matter movement has always been here before the death of George Floyd, but I really do think that this was the kick in the bucket. It angered Americans much, much more than ever before. So there's a saying called opportunistic looting. And what opportunistic looting is, people are using the opportunity of an inconvenience as their excuse to loot stores. And so something that struck me personally during the start of the rioting and looting was that the Minneapolis mayor stated that what started as a large peaceful protest for George Floyd has turned out to be outright looting and domestic terrorism in their region. And it really does it makes sense. What started out as a peaceful protest with good intent, people are now using as an excuse to steal that extra toy or their clothes or electronics. It's no longer about change in America. It's selfishness. Like, I can't be the only one who feels that the theft of all these things relate to the death of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or all the other wrongful deaths in America. Okay, so why is it seen as an excuse to be arrested or injured? So there is an idea of mob mentality during all these violent protests. Mob mentality can be defined as when one person in the large group of angry people or just vulnerable people in the group does one thing, it influences everyone else to do the same thing. You know, one person in the start of the protest gets angry and can start to, push police buttons, and, people in the back of the group can also be watching this and say, oh, he's doing it, we should do it too. So I think that's kind of where a lot of these violent protests have come about. One person is angry, everyone gets angry. So I think that there was an implementation of mob mentality during these past couple months. So in total, there was over about 570 arrests in Minneapolis alone. And there were also 25 American deaths across the country. This can mean that they were either injured from their own, wrongdoing. People, were shooting fireworks in the streets or causing fires, just overall arson. They could have been hurt doing that. Or just the violence of it all caused them to pass away. And so nationwide, there was over 10,000 arrests. And I'm sure there's a lot more than that. But the fact that nationwide there's over 10,000 in the span of just a couple months just really shows how much chaos it has been. And so this is an example of mob mentality. You can see that this is at the Minneapolis police station. And as it all started to unfold, fire across the entire town, you have a group of people standing up as if they're leaders and, just encouraging this behavior. And you have people on the ground going along with this idea. And this it can cause more chaos. Like, as we can see, it can cause more property damage as well. So this is another idea of mob mentality. You see on the left, the cop car completely destroyed. You have people smashing the windows and just breaking it. And then on the right, you can see more arson. That's a police car completely set on fire. And you have a mob behind it. And those are two more very good examples of mob mentality. Again, you can see the difference between a peaceful protest versus violent. And so, conclusion, there needs to be more education from both parties. As a young American, it is so easy to be persuaded from one direction to another if you don't have all the facts, and just the more education, the better, But it is hard when you're surrounded by violent protests. It is hard to, just change an opinion really quickly about how you're viewing the Black Lives Matter organization when you're surrounded by the violent protests yourself. Of course, there are some great peaceful protests that really do make a difference. But when you're surrounded by the violent ones, it's just hard to see those peaceful ones. And so the past couple months, everything has just shown our nation's weakness and how there is an inequality. And America is very vulnerable right now, and we need some sort of healing and justice for both parties, police and our fellow Black Americans. I think there is, with the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everyone else, it does shed a bad light on our police. But that doesn't mean that there's good police. And the same things with the Black Lives Matter movement. Just because there are some violent protests doesn't mean that the whole organization is flawed. However, it does show that they can be misrepresented. And I think the past couple months, with all the violent protests, it has given Americans the opportunity to view the organization as violent themselves. It doesn't mean that they are. It just shows that there can be a bad light shined on them. And then here is my work cited. And